Our next observation assessment method that we'll be discussing is anecdotal record. An anecdotal record is when you write down a detailed narrative or story about something that you observed, and it's going to be written after you observe the event or incident or behavior or skill that you're interested in. So it still should be something like a class list log where you determine ahead of time what you are interested in observing, a particular time of day, a skill, a child. So it's not just, oh, I was hanging out in the classroom and watching kids randomly without a specific plan, and now I'm going to go write down all the things that I saw. It's, I'm going to go watch this particular child today to look for these particular kinds of behaviors at this particular time. And then when I'm done observing, I'm going to go write down what I saw that happened. So it should be intentional, it should have a plan, it should be factual, and it should occur immediately after the incident in as much detail as you can remember to write down. So you're going to write it like a story. You're going to tell the when, where, who, what happened, what was the result. If there's any direct quotes that you can remember, how children pronounced things. So if they said car seat, seat cart, you're going to write that down rather than correcting it so that you catch an accurate record in detail of what was said and done. And then you're going to keep out your own personal ideas and opinions. It really should just be a factual account. And this is considered to be something called an open method. So we're going to be talking in this class about closed methods and open methods. Open methods are things where you are writing down anything that you saw happened rather than limiting the data you're recording to a particular thing or item. So later we're going to talk about checklists. When you're using a checklist, that is a closed method because you are just noting what is already given to you on the checklist, whereas this open method, you are writing down the whole story and you don't know what that story is going to be ahead. So this is just a sample, but unlike a class list log, which has, you're looking for more specific kinds of behaviors that have particular things that might happen, this can be more open-ended, like a story would be more open-ended. So what is the child's process for finding something that interests them? How do they go about getting involved with other children? What happens when something difficult occurs? Are they able to persist? Are they taking responsibility for things that they've done? What is the story of their learning? So if they're really interested in spraying water outside on things and then watching to see what happens to the water after they spray it, these are things that you can write a whole complete story about. It's not just a quick note about, you know, what did the child do when they entered the classroom? That's going to be some quick notes versus how does the story play out? So it's really important when we're thinking about observing children and assessing how they're doing to pick the right method for the right situation. So, you know, is this a quick note thing? Is this a check an item off a list? Or is this a whole story narrative? And depending on what it is I want to know about the child, that's going to help determine which one of these observation/assessment methods that I choose to use for the day. So when creating an anecdotal record, you could just write it down on a piece of paper or type it onto an electronic device like a story. But if you want a little bit more structure, you could use the form that is provided on this slide or something like it. So you can see that it has story information, but doesn't have full sentences and those kinds of things. So if this is a little bit easier for you to use, this could certainly be something that you could use when you're creating an anecdotal record. So you can see it has the child's name, kind of the when and where things happen. So the time, who the child was with, where the child was in the classroom, the date, who was the one creating the anecdotal record. You can see that there is a factual description of what the child is doing. So she's dressing for outdoor play, leans over with eyes closed, and puts the two parts of the zipper together. When she tries to pull it up, it slips out. She grits her teeth, stomps her feet, looks up. I can't do it. And you can see that it is a quotation, so it's trying to capture what the child said, because remember, this is something that we're writing down after the fact. And continuing on with the story, adding in sort of the conversational part, which is very story-like, right? When we read a story, we're reading dialogue between characters and reading what the character said. So we want to make sure to do that as accurately as possible. Now you can, if you want, have these comments also on the side. These comments are reminders of things that the teacher would like to do based on the factual observations that were created. So thinking ahead about what does this information mean and what can I do with it. So in our next lecture, when we talk about checklists, we're going to talk a little bit more about what your factual objective information that you collect during these observation assessment methods might mean and what you can do with that information, how you navigate thinking about what information means. But this is just an example of collecting objective factual information, writing down exactly what happens, and then thinking about what we can do with that information to help or assist the child in their growth and development. So again, just an example of a way to record an anecdotal story or recording, something that we're doing after we've observed a particular incident. So I do just want to remind that even though an anecdotal record is written after the fact, so it's written after we've observed something, it's not a diary. So we're not writing down just our kind of thoughts and feelings and impressions of a particular situation. We are writing down exactly what happened when we were observing something, trying to capture it in as much accurate detail as possible. So you can see that a diary is kind of a summary of things that happened in your own words, your own filtering of what happened in that particular situation. It may or may not leave out actual factual information because it's just something written for yourself, your own impressions of what occurred. And it can be written right away. It can be written months down the road. It can be written a year down the road. That is not how an anecdotal record works. An anecdotal record is providing as much accurate, factual, happened detail as possible so you feel like you were there when the incident happened, and we're writing it as closely following the incident that took place as possible to make sure that we can capture all of those objective factual details. On this slide is a great video that helps you to understand what an anecdotal record is and how it can be used. So I would encourage you to watch this so that you understand and learn a little bit more about how to collect and use anecdotal records. So this is our participation activity for this week's lecture. So this is your opportunity to practice. So I want you to look at the picture that I have provided for you, and I know that it is just a picture and doesn't give you tons and tons of detail, but I want you to take as much detail as you possibly can from this slide and try to write a completely objective, factual, only what you see, no subjective bias or subjective comments working their way in. Just write a completely objective, factual, based on what you see in the picture, anecdotal record. So let's give a quick recap of advantages and disadvantages of using an anecdotal record. So one, you don't need any special forms to complete an anecdotal record. You will see later when we start talking about some of our other observation and assessment methods that particular forms are needed to be able to use them. But this, you just need a piece of paper or something to type into. It can be electronic or paper and pencil. It is a great way to preserve lots of detail because it's an open-ended method. You're really getting a sense of being there. You're getting a lot of context, the when, where, why, what, how. So it's very rich in terms of how much data you're collecting. If you're good at it, you can separate your factual, written, objective account from your subjective, more inferential account of the incident. So it's clear what actually happened, what the true story was versus your thoughts, opinions, beliefs, etc. about that thing. It is a great tool to be able to use to think about all areas of development and how children are doing and what they're doing and what's going on at particular moments in time, so we can look at social things, cognitive things, more academic things like reading and writing. It is a multi-purpose tool for looking at children's learning, growth, and development. It could be a good way to capture details if you are trying to provide a referral for a child who might need special education services or who has been a victim of abuse or neglect. So it captures details that would be important in that kind of referral environment. So choosing which incidents to record might be difficult. So that's a disadvantage. So thinking about, so we as humans, we tend to focus on things that are important to us and maybe give less attention to things that are not important to us. So you might miss out on recording about something that is important to be paying attention to because it didn't feel important to you. It is very intense writing. Not all of us are good at writing that much detail, remembering what people said, remembering exactly when they said it, how they said it. So you have to be a good storyteller and you have to be good at capturing that kind of detail to be good at providing an anecdotal record. If you're spending a lot of time doing this, that may be time that you have to step away from the classroom. So not everybody has the ability to sit down and write an anecdotal record when you're busy caring for and working directly with young children. As much as it would be great to be able to write a story about a child's entire day or a 30-minute stretch, really the reality is an anecdotal record probably covers a couple minutes in time, because that's all you can remember the detail for to be able to record and write. So while it's rich contextual detail, it is generally a small snippet of time. And it probably is only going to focus on a small number of children or one child, because again, that complexity of having multiple people that you're recording about is generally going to be too much for an anecdotal recording. So on this slide, I really just want you to brainstorm. So I don't have anything in particular that I'm trying to say here, but I want you to brainstorm what could make an anecdotal record easy for you. So, I'm thinking about sort of our modern ability and, tools that we have available to us. So it might be a great idea to record something that's going on and then ask AI to create a summary of that event, right? So our ability to have computers kind of do the work for us could make anecdotal recording a lot easier. Now, if you are going to use those kinds of tools, you have to be careful about where those recordings end up, how they're used, how the AI data is stored, what's done with it, being careful about using names. So, I think just really thinking carefully about, if I wanted to create this kind of anecdotal record story kind of thing about a child and their development, what tools could I use to make that easier and capture that detail that I want while still maintaining children's confidentiality and protecting information about them. So this again is just kind of a food for thought kind of slide in thinking about anecdotal records and how they can best be done. And it is a reminder that when you are in a situation where you are watching, observing a child or children, and you want to create this anecdotal record, making sure to use all of your senses, like pay attention to all the things that are going on. Watch what the children are doing. Listen to the sounds of the classroom. Listen to tones of voices. Listen to exactly what children are saying. You probably aren't using your sense of touch, but maybe thinking about, is anyone touching anyone else? Is there an element of touch in the story that you're trying to tell? So what is going on with regard to that particular sense? Do you smell anything? Do you think that the smells of the classroom, the odors that you're experiencing might have some impact on what you're seeing? Is it worth noting, right? Is everybody crying and there seems to be kind of maybe like a burnt or acrid smell in the air that day? That might be worth noting because that may have something to do with the children's behavior that day. Again, tasting, I don't know that you're going to personally experience this, but maybe children are at snack and they're eating something new and perhaps that's impacting their behavior. And then just sort of that sixth sense, that intuition we have about what's going on and what is happening in the world. Just be tuned in fully to the experience of watching so that you're collecting all the details that you possibly can collect. I'm not asking you to actually do this, but if you go back to slide 7, where you were looking at that picture and writing your anecdotal record, imagine that you were actually in the classroom and that particular incident was taking place. Is there any kind of sensory information that might be happening in a picture like that that would allow you to add detail to the story that you were telling, that would allow you to add richness and context to your description? One final note to wrap up. What can we do with anecdotal record kind of information? So we could put these stories in children's portfolios or their files. We could use them to fuel our own intentional teaching to help us to think about how we might change our relationships, interactions, activities, curriculum, programs, interactions with families, etc. We could share this information with other teachers or staff on our team. We could share the information with families. We could share it with or confer with other helping professionals. So are there speech and language pathologists? Are there occupational therapists? Are there physicians? Are there people that might need to know this information, and perhaps this story could provide good context and understanding for what's going on with a particular child? We could use them in our own conversations with the children in our care. So if we wrote a story about a child who's having a hard time interacting with other children when they're wanting to play in the same area, maybe we could use that story in our conversations. I was watching the other day and I noticed this, or sometimes when I'm wanting to play with someone, I get a little nervous. So this is good information for you to use in creating those very rich, targeted interactions with the children in your care. And sometimes, and we're going to talk about this later in the class, sometimes we have to use this kind of information to provide to professionals who might be seeking to determine if a child has been abused or neglected in any kind of way. So we might need these kinds of detailed, exact stories, and this is what folks who work in social services occupations and social work or child protective services, they have to write these kinds of reports. So later in the class, we're going to be talking about professions that use the kinds of observation and assessment methods that we're talking about in this class. And anecdotal record is one type of methodology that is used by child services professionals. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about how those child services professionals employ that kind of strategy when serving in the positions that they do.